Without further ado, I'd like to call John to the podium to deliver us his speech. Thank you, John.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to come here and listen to us yet again. I think the title of my speech is what it is, but I'm just going to talk to you about things that I think are important. So we have, I think the title is Causes of the Financial Crisis and How We Go Forward. I want to focus much more on going forward than I do on the past, because I think the past, certainly in Cyprus and definitely in the Eurozone, has been a little over-talked about in the course of the last many years. I'm also conscious I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm watching my watch. I can, as I'm genetically programmed to do, talk for as long as you want me to. So I'm planning only to talk about those things I think that matter. I think I also have a mic on here, so I can probably move around a little bit, but the safety of the podium is probably not a bad place to start. I wanted to start with the macro. You know, the world started to fall apart in the autumn of 2007. That's 7+ years ago. And at that time, everyone realized that the world had gone through a significant gorging of debt, that governments had borrowed more than they were capable of generating in tax revenues, that the financial system had become overgeared, and indeed that households had felt that they would live forever and that they could borrow bigger multiples of their earnings because their assets would always grow in value. Now, all of those things translated into countries, excluding the banking system, basically gearing up enormously against their earnings on the presumption that earnings would grow and that they would be able to repair what looked like dangerous metrics. And if you look at the level of debt in the world today, it's, according to a McKinsey report recently done, about $199 trillion. Now that's nearly 199 trillion euros, sadly. That's a lot of money. And it grew by 57 trillion during the crisis. So $57,000 million of debt added to households and governments' balance sheets during the course of a recessionary and contraction environment, which meant that today the problem is worse at a global level than it was 7 years ago. And that should concern us all, because that debt has to be repaid. 27 trillion of that 57 trillion was borrowed by governments to fund the lifestyles that we've created in Western democracies, mostly Western democracies, to ensure that the populations we talk to continue to believe in the type of government we have. In China, during that 7 years, the debt has quadrupled from 7 trillion to 28 trillion. 10 major economies in the world have GDP to debt ratios in excess of 100%. There are lots and lots of things in the world today that are troubling, not just to Cyprus, but to the world more generally. Now, the reason I'm starting with such a ridiculously large landscape is that I think we have to start there to give ourselves context as to whether Cyprus itself has a chance of recovering, given everyone else is in a similar situation. And the good news is that I think Cyprus is much better positioned to recover than the majority of large nations in the world, and let me explain why. Cyprus, its GDP borrowings, excluding the banking sector, and so financial and household, or government and household, it's close to 300%, give or take. So is China. So is the United States. Japan is 501%. Spain is in excess of 400%. And I can wander through all of the countries and give you those statistics. Cyprus is in very good company. But Cyprus has an underutilized economy. And this is why I want, with all the business people in the room, to try and change your perspective from one of just focusing on austerity and shrinking to one of creating opportunity and prosperity by getting behind a plan for growth for the country. And again, let me explain what I mean by that. If I take my own home nation, Ireland, which is the western gateway to the European Union, and I compare it to Cyprus, which I regard as the eastern gateway to the European Union, and I look at the level of GDP produced in Cyprus per head compared to the GDP produced in Ireland per head. And I'll give you some numbers. So take your 17 billion of GDP that Cyprus produces. There's a population of about 1/5 of what Ireland has, but presents the same type of business activity, connectivity, gateway. Cyprus would have an equivalent to Ireland GDP of 85 billion. Ireland has 138 billion. That is the simple starting point. Your GDP per head is too low. Now, how do we fix it? Well, we fix it by creating a plan, but not a plan dreamt up in the sort of corridors of households and businesses, a plan that actually takes the GDP of the nation, how its productive resources are deployed, understanding how it is helped by government in terms of fiscal stimulus, etc., how it creates employment, what its multiplier effects are, and actually unveiling a 5 to 10-year vision for what the country could do to take its GDP today from 17 billion to why not beyond 30 billion. And I think that is absolutely within the grasp of Cyprus if we can get business and government and the people focused away from the myopic discussions that I have observed, certainly in the English-speaking press in Cyprus, onto the things that matter. And the things that matter have to be about focusing the energies, the direction, the intent of the people and businesses in Cyprus, along with the policymakers of Cyprus, to create a future for our kids and their kids. To ensure that the scourge of emigration doesn't continue to be something on the minds of all the mums and dads of Cyprus. To make sure that the sunshine is monetized and that we're not subsidizing the closure of an industry for 5 months rather than subsidizing an industry being open. And I want to provoke you a little more. Mallorca, the somewhat irrelevant island off the coast of Spain where Ewan has a holiday home. It attracts irrelevant people. This is what happens. Mallorca has a permanent population of 800,000 people on the island, and they attract 11.6 million tourists a year. And they have sunshine, which is nowhere near as good as Cyprus's. But they have managed to turn it into a cycling haven in the winter. They've managed to bring people to it in their droves. So the population of Mallorca is, on average, 1 million people higher every month than it would have been if they didn't get the tourist policy right. Cyprus hasn't grown its tourist numbers in a decade and hasn't created enough of a plan and a drive for us to monetize properly the natural resources that sit on this island. So connectivity is a big issue. We can go through all of the various sectors in the economy, whether it's education, whether it's medicine, whether it's business services, whether it's convalescence, whether it's retirement, whether it's broadbanding the nation through the use of a properly organized plan against the Juncker plan that's being put in place across Europe. All of these things are things we have to get a collective discussion going on to try and change the agenda from austerity to the foundations that austerity has built to create prosperity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has to be the mission of everyone in this room. Your businesses, unless you're selling cheap bread, which Zorbas may be in the room, I don't know, and you sell good bread, not cheap bread, different thing altogether. Unless you're selling Giffen goods, you should be wanting your country to have a plan that we can get behind such that we can create a greater level of earnings in the country which will support all of the things that currently give it troublesome. Looking back over the last decade in Cyprus, after joining the euro, and looking at the fueled property boom that occurred in Cyprus because of the flood of liquidity onto this island, it was not good for the island, and it was not good for how we created businesses. The property markets have been falling since the fourth quarter of 2008, but we as a bank, and some of you as constructors or business people, invested heavily into a sector that was falling over a period of 6 years. That was fundamentally catastrophic, and that needs to be remedied. We have to bring more footfall to the island of Cyprus for Cyprus to recover. And that footfall can be here to do many, many things, not just tourism. We have 50 tax treaties of merit around the world. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of qualified business professionals, a huge number of law firms, a huge number of accounting firms, a great level of intellect, a highly educated workforce, all of the things that you naturally expect in a progressive modern economy capable of competing with the Switzerlands, the Irelands, the Luxembourgs, the Americas, the UK, the Dubais of this world. And I think we're wasting the opportunity. I think I've watched the legislative agenda kangaroo about for 7 months. We have the legislation on foreclosures, which needs to pass. And I'm not saying that in a self-interested way because the bank needs it to pass, society needs it to pass, because if you don't have a functioning banking system, you can't have credit in the economy, and if you don't have credit in the economy, you can't grow. So we need these things in place in order to create a functioning banking system with an appropriate moral hazard so depositors don't get killed in the way they got killed in this economy. Now, I have views about whether the European Union treated Cyprus properly or not. And those views are very clear and very publicly aired. I think Cyprus could have been better treated by the federation that it joined. But this is looking back, and I think we have to look forward. This bank is here to lend. We recapitalized its base by €1 billion. We have nearly 3.5 billion of capital in this bank. We're levered at 7.7 times on our equity. We absolutely want to lend to you, for you to make this country and your businesses prosperous. But we can't really fundamentally achieve that unless we all face the same direction, unless we all recognize what happened in the past. I am extremely empathetic with those people who lost their money, the shareholders, the bondholders, the depositors in Bank of Cyprus who ultimately had to recapitalize the exposures transferred in from Laiki. All of these things add up to a great degree of angst and ire, things that we must consider and we must try and deal with. But we can only deal with them in reality if we create prosperity. The government of Cyprus has done a good job so far in actually getting a grip of your fiscal issues. But that's step one. Step one. Step 2, 3, 4, and 5 have yet to be taken. We have to decide here what we're going to do in trying to aim policy at the future. And then we're going to have to decide how we create the resources for you to achieve those objectives in creating employment and in creating wealth, to replace destroyed depositors' wealth, but also to create a future for Cyprus itself. Then you can change the debt to GDP ratios. Then you can stop property falling. Then you can actually show that Cyprus, yet again, for the nth time in history, has actually taken itself up and made itself strong, powerful, and a place worth being again. I spoke to an Israeli man yesterday. It's the first time I've really spoken to someone who had come to Cyprus for what Cyprus has from Israel. And he said the instability in the region, in the nearby region, is absolutely encouraging people like him to relocate to Cyprus. But he said the only thing that keeps me here is faith that the system will deliver what it's promising, even if it hasn't yet. And I think there's an obligation on everyone in this room and an obligation on the political class and the obligation on journalists to get very serious and long-term about the discussions we're having about the future of Cyprus. Because today, too many of the conversations are myopic. They are focused on somewhat irrelevant vortexes that we need to move away from. And indeed, if we don't do that, then we missed the opportunity and we waste the crisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said to you at the beginning, I am conscious that my genetics allow me to talk forever. I have many other topics I'd like to discuss with you. And actually, in individual conversations I have with virtually every Cypriot, you know what needs to be done. But the bravery of the collective is missing. And I think the voice of the collective has to actually come up and be heard, so we move the debate away from that of myopic self-interest into one of national interest and creating a prosperity not just for your businesses but for the nation as a whole, because that in itself will make Cyprus not just safe but actually wealthy and prosperous, and a nation to be not just respected but also revered in the community of nations around the world. And that might sound like a politician's speech, and it might sound like something that I'm not talking about the bank. Actually, it is an entirely self-interested speech, because if the country gets its act together and does this, the bank does really well, and those in it do really well, because we get to be serving a prosperous nation. So it is a somewhat self-interested speech, even if it doesn't sound like it is. and I think we get to talk about it in any case in the Q&A at the end. And I think am I handing over to Ewan?
After we finish.
Okay, but who's doing next? Who's speaking? You're speaking next. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Nicholas Barsis now, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you will enjoy today's afternoon. You should get involved. You should absolutely take a contra view to mine if you think it's a good thing to do. And let's get some energy and debate going in the room, because that's the one thing that keeps us all interested in life in Cyprus, the debate. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.